With my course, I'm framing it in four quadrants. I just go through each quadrant and explain what it's like for the individual, maybe the body of the exterior, and also with the family dynamic in terms of how it shows up in the interior of the family. People talk about emotional maturity, and as with integral theory, there's like a developmental line of emotion intelligence. And so I think some people could be stunted there in terms of emotional maturity. But then obviously there's a cluster B personality in terms of narcissism. There's people who have been diagnosed with it. And then there's also people that can be on the spectrum. And so I just wanted you, because I took one of your talks recently and you mentioned cluster B and you talked about how with narcissism, it's got a lot to do with superiority. So always wanting to be better and having always position themselves as better. I guess that's what I just wanted to inquire into is just how do you help your clients and how you think about this, particularly in the family dynamics, how it shows up and how you help the individual with this situation.
First of all, it's useful to recognize that people are either normal crazy or extra crazy. A normal person who's emotionally immature can grow if they're confronted and getting the right input and help. Some emotionally immature people get in a relationship. And it's a relative term, of course. There's normal crazy and there's extra crazy. Extra crazy is easy to see: bipolar, hypomania, schizophrenia, autism. But then there's personality disorders, which are 15 to 19% of the general population, 30 to 80% of most clinical populations. And personality disorders are people that have one trait that they just compulsively do that has negative consequences, and they just don't have the capacity to self-observe themselves doing that. And it's so extraordinary that people just compulsively do the same thing and can't observe the same negative consequences. It took 70 years for psychology to figure it out, which I find pretty hilarious. Now, the cluster Bs used to be called, interestingly, the immature, because they never really developed the adult complement of diverse traits and self-observation that allows us to navigate. And especially in therapy, we run into borderline and narcissistic personality disorder. Now, general population is only 1.5% of general population is narcissistic, 1.5% borderline, but disproportionately represented in causing problems. What happens in a system is that when you have somebody who has a chronic problem, the system adjusts around that and becomes codependent. And that causes a lot of problems. And systems in general, going into family therapy, 5.5 million years ago, we came down out of the trees, developed a pair bond because a woman needed a guy around who would sacrifice his life for her and her kids. Those families created the ancestral tribes. And those families created hierarchies, the husband and the wife or the mates, and then the kids. These hierarchies were two different kinds. Growth hierarchies or dominator hierarchies. Growth hierarchies are hierarchies that are fair. They support everybody's development. And dominator hierarchies where somebody dominates with a symptom or with power. To this day, every human institution and every family has some combination of growth hierarchies or dominator hierarchies. Psychotherapy started as an individual treatment, psychoanalysis. Murray Bowen, a psychiatrist who worked with schizophrenics, realized families organize around the schizophrenic and actually support the schizophrenia and adapt to it. He didn't use the word codependent, but basically they were codependent systems. He postulated that if you worked with those systems, you could help people get better. That led to this blossoming of family therapy systems in the mid part of the last century. You got a Murray Bowen system. He encouraged people to differentiate. And you have Jay Haley and Chloe Madonna's doing strategic family therapy. And then you had Salvador Minuchin doing structural family therapy. Salvador Minuchin observed that in a family, if the parents were in charge and coordinated, and if they made it fair, essentially made it a growth hierarchy, everybody did better. And that was the organizing principle of his therapy. He would sit down with families, notice the codependence, notice whoever was hijacking the moment, and then work with the hierarchy until you had a mom and dad aligned with each other, in charge with kids, with rules that were fair and caring, that had boundaries that were kind but firm. And as he did that, those families got healthier. And so that's how this arose
Mm.
as a family therapy treatment. And it's still existing. A lot of people do family therapy. I'm sure you do. I do. 30% of my practice is couples, where you're working with the system of the couple. And we all use the strategic stuff, the Jay Haley stuff, and we use the Minuchin stuff, whether we've studied with Minuchin or not. And Richard Schwartz was a family therapist, applies family therapy to people's interior selves, and that's what internal family systems is. Now, when you're in a system and somebody has a problem, and say it's emotional immaturity, okay, frequent. Let's say you're 18-year-olds, have a kid, you're immature.
Yeah.
If you're normal crazy, you can get help from people. Personality disorders are highly heritable. 75 to 85% of narcissism is heritable. We're born to be a narcissist or a borderline or a obsessive compulsive personality disorder. If you're a normal crazy, you can receive influence and adjust to have more of a liberation hierarchy in your family. If you're an extra crazy person, wait a minute. Remember, extra crazy people can't observe themselves doing their narcissists can't observe themselves being consistently grandiose and superior and never feeling equal to other people and not being able to receive feedback. Borderlines cannot observe themselves having disproportionate emotional reactions. Paranoids cannot observe themselves being chronically suspicious of other people, and so on. If you're a kid, you got to manage up and handle the parent. If you're a parent, you need to work with whatever capacity your kid has and begin to set the boundaries to make it more difficult for them to engage in the inappropriate behavior and begin the long process of teaching them self-awareness and appropriate traits. So you can learn a different kind of trait. So you can teach a kid to be aware of themselves being disproportionate, being grandiose, and not being able to tolerate being equal, and then learning how to do it, and so on. And there was one study that was done by Lyons Ruth with high-risk kids. And she had a nurse go in every week with these mothers, the borderline mothers, incarcerated people. They taught the mothers to do three things: to talk to a kid like they were a regular person, to teach them empathy. People feel bad when you do this thing to them, and to teach them problem solving. If there's a problem, don't create drama around it. Do problem solving. Those kids had 40% less conduct disorders 15 years later. So there's some evidence that if we organized the family, that it ameliorates some of the effects of a personality disorder. Narcissism is very popular right now because the world is being dominated by a specific narcissist, Trump. And I always wondered that an open question for me is, what do you do with a narcissist when you make them the most powerful and important person in the world? Probably nothing good. Stalin had paranoid personality disorder. He just kept killing people. So the day he died, he was killing people. Every personal assistant he ever had, he killed. He was going after the Communist Party. When he finally dropped dead, he'd killed 20 million people. Trump will continue to do as much power grabbing as he can. In a family, when you teach people how to handle somebody, you teach them, first of all, to be aware of what your reactions are. When someone's acting badly, you feel like saying, stop it. Stop acting badly. Don't you see how you're hurting me? And when a person can't, you go, is to raise your level of emotional intensity. You do this with kids, sometimes with parents. And you want to snap them out of it. Look, I want to have a talk with you and teach you what's going on. Never works. So in therapy, we teach people how to handle extra crazy people. For instance, with narcissists, you learn how to manage them. And there's times when you can relate comfortably with them, and then when they have to demean and withdraw from you, don't take it personally, create some space, wait until they've calmed down, and then go back to whatever your agenda is. And we spend a lot of time, us therapists, teaching people how to handle extra crazy people, whether it's sisters, brothers, sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, grandparents.
Maybe one question is, you said that there's awareness, like they don't really know what they're doing necessarily.
Right.
I guess some of what I've heard or read is that they might know what they're doing, but they don't really care. There's a notion of cold empathy, like they can usually figure things out, but I guess you're saying they don't necessarily have that insight or Yeah, like there's something missing and they're wired different.
Yeah, it's neurological. They're, they've seen deficits, for instance, with psychopaths, antisocial personality disorder. There are deficits in the paralimbic system that can be observed. You can be aware of other people and still exploit them, which is psychopaths, but also you can do that more deliberately if you're a narcissist. You just don't see yourself doing the same negative thing with the same negative results. When someone challenges you on it, you come up with rationalizations, defenses, and so on. It doesn't register as a problem. Most people, when they come to therapy, normal crazy people, they'll tell you a symptom. I'm depressed, I'm anxious, something like that. And that's the problem. A narcissist comes into treatment because of the results of their problem. People don't realize how superior I am. People are not giving me the respect that I am due. They don't come in and say, oh, yeah, I'm chronically grandiose and I can't feel equal with other people and it's causing me problems. It makes it very difficult to deal with them. Most of the personality disorders are treatable, but it's difficult and takes a long time. You have to install circuits in somebody's brain, self-observation, self-regulation circuits, and gradually build an emerging awareness of the new traits that they need to practice and the inappropriateness of the thing that they keep doing chronically over and over again.
I see. You mentioned bone family therapy, right? And so clients come to me and they're usually having challenges with their parents, their in-laws. They're forming their own family. With bone family therapy, there's a notion of differentiation, staying connected but separate and in your authentic self. Sometimes it's the man and maybe it's the mother-in-law that's influencing that person, and then they might be more of a people pleaser, or they're chronically not happy because the wife's not happy or the mom's not happy. There can be these boundaries crossing that occurs on special events. So some people say limiting contact, or some people go no contact. Sometimes it is space away and limiting contact because, like you said, it's disruptive to that person and they can get dysregulated and it shows up in their family and they don't want to repeat that pattern with their children. I'm curious about that. How do you usually coach someone around that? Because usually it's all about boundary setting, staying regulated yourself.
First of all, everybody's different. These categories help us understand the territory. If I understood deserts, I could go to one place in the desert and go to another place, and I wouldn't be familiar, but I understood the territory. It's like that with family systems. Usually, when someone has a symptom like grandiosity or entitlement, things that we see, sadism, they get upset, like the borderline thing, disproportionate reaction. All of a sudden, they take offense and they want to attack somebody. That's destabilizing. And generally, what happens is people learn how to be codependent. They teach people like that, treat people like that like normal crazy people instead of like extra crazy people. It's interesting, the whole emotional immaturity. I like that frame. Because what do you do with a 4-year-old who's giving you a hard time? You don't try to reason with them, because good luck with that. What you do is you say, this is what I'm going to do. If you don't stop screaming, I'm going to pick you up and carry you to your room. 1, 2, 3, pick you up, carry you to your room. And the more you can do that in a firm and kind fashion, the better. And so you do the same thing if you're dealing with the mother-in-law. Mother-in-law gets drunk and goes off on people. So he says, you can come to Seder Christmas dinner, but you can't drink. So if you're going to drink, I don't want you to come. Okay? You can say it's another thing. Say she chronically insults people. So she starts insulting you or your kid or your wife. You go, look, it's not okay to put people down. You can't say that around here. So you just stop. And if you don't stop, I'm going to leave or you're going to leave. And then they either stop or they don't. I've noticed people will adjust their behavior sometimes if the relationship is important enough to them. For instance, mothers and adult, you have a family and you have your mother, father, and uncle. Generally, you're more important to them than they are to you. And so that's the boundary. And you need to stop this. And if you can't stop it, I'm going to do something. And then you do something. In as matter of fact, in as kind and firm a fashion as possible. Now, this could take many forms. And what you're doing is you're orienting yourself to whoever has the symptom. It's either they have the symptom and they can work on it. You can ask somebody to get in therapy and then get in therapy and work on it. Normal crazy people grow. You can offer to be in therapy with them. Why don't you and I go see my therapist together? If they're extra crazy, then you don't want to do that. I don't want somebody to bring their extra crazy mother-in-law into treatment or their extra crazy daughter into treatment. I've tried that. I've been doing this 50 years, maybe 75,000 therapy sessions. I've done a lot of these things. Those sessions don't go well. Why? Because the extra crazy person hijacks the session and you spend the session just trying to manage that. It's a different work when you make those discriminations. It's useful to understand this stuff is heritable. People don't say my mother-in-law or my father-in-law has a personality disorder. They say she's a bitch. He's an asshole. If you're in a group and there's confusion, upset, and conflict, there's a personality disorder in that group, and that's a family as a group. Rather than waste time trying to engage that in any kind of hostile way, kind of have radical acceptance that's happening, and now use your agency as a human being to set the boundaries around you so that you don't allow bad behavior in your presence. My family of origin, my mother had borderline personality disorder. I set some boundaries, and then there were certain behaviors that didn't happen around me, that did happen around my brother, because my brother didn't set the boundaries.
I see. And you mentioned earlier about inner family systems, and sometimes with my clients, there's the notion of the like an inner child, or we have these different parts of the self. And
Mhm.
so when they're around family, it's likely that these inner parts are getting triggered, or this inner child that they have, and maybe expectations that they still maybe want that family or their parents to care for them or love them. But then sometimes people talk about like the notion of the adult self versus the child self and manage your expectations. If you, like you said, radically accept this is the way your parents are. I think it's not easy. You almost have to grieve that childhood and the things you no longer have, or accept that maybe your parent just isn't able to do that. Does that make sense in terms of if they are still wanting that relationship with their parent and they can't provide that, they're likely to get triggered, then there's that explosion and that feeds the cycle, right? In a negative way. Yeah. What do you think about that, I guess, in terms of parts work and the system you're mentioning?
First of all, that's exactly right. When we're around our family of origin, we have endless learning, relational patterns that go back to birth that we've developed with these people. So they trigger those patterns. Every state of consciousness that we have has a different self. Until we individuate to the point where we can observe ourselves shifting from the self to state. This is why you talked about the quadrants, which is a good way to evaluate the present moment. This is why states are super important. Quadrants, levels, lines, states. Crazy is a typology system, just like masculine and feminine. These states get triggered and you begin to find yourself engaging in archaic patterns with different family members. If you don't observe it, the pattern takes over. If you observe it, then you have choices and you can choose to do something else. And part of what you said earlier, I think is really important. Most people try to be good parents, just like normal crazy people try to be good parents. We grew up in a family where an immature parent, where we got injured by neglect or abuse, but they were still trying. We always have a vision of that ideal parent that we want to have. We have it at 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60. If we have a parent that is just not going to deal with their stuff, which happens a fair amount, part of what we do is grieve that idealized parent. We grieve that parent in psychotherapy, where we have to face the fact, yeah, my mom loves me, and periodically she's going to say something cruel because that's what she does. And she'll have a disproportionate level of anger when she's saying that level of cruelty, and she's not able to observe that or change that. And that's my mom. Or my dad is going to start trying to bully me. Or my dad is going to go real quiet and not tell anybody what he's thinking or feeling. And when I ask him about it, he says, leave me alone. At some point, you recognize that person is not going to address that issue. And you're grieving the idealized parent that you always carried around inside that was able to catch those sadistic impulses and regulate them, that was able to stand up and assert rather than collapse. And that's hard. But in Integral, we talk about how in the include and transcend process, that for every developmental step that you take forward, you're leaving the death of a previous self. There's grief that we have to deal with periodically, the losses, the normal losses of life. And that's one of them that people often have to address. In therapy, when they discover that their parent will not be able to be the kind of parent they always wanted them to be.
Do you think part of that is that you obviously grew up in this family and you might suppress it? And then later in life, you, I think intellectually might understand what's going on sometimes, but then emotionally, you're still maybe enmeshed to some degree, or you explain
Yeah.
away. A lot of my clients gaslight themselves. There can be a lot of self-doubt. Because over time, if you're in that receiving end of that dynamic, they tend to make it about you and that you're the one that's causing this, or they're shifting blame, they're deflecting. And so sometimes a lot of people feel like they're the problem. That's where I came from, thinking I have this anxiety. Why does my family not get this? I try to explain it to them, and you do all these things, you read these books, and why don't they get it right? And I think it really takes some time, right, to usually get to that point where you don't grieve that, like you mentioned.
If you're around somebody that causes you distress, you seem like a normal crazy person to me.
Thanks.
You go, what's wrong with me? The whole inner critic thing is a necessary developmental step. It's a stepping stone and an important one. We developed a capacity for shame at around 11 or 12 months. It's a necessary capacity because we can feel separate and distressed if somebody's disapproving of us. And that's how social learning takes place. And around 2, when we develop a theory of mind, we can observe ourselves and then feel ashamed if we observe ourselves violating a value. The values line of development, the moral line, there's the values line and the moral line of development. They continue to go, but there's always this process of our nervous system observing us. If we violate a core value, we'll feel one of the shame emotions, guilt, shame, embarrassment, that kind of stuff. And a winning strategy for kids is to observe themselves violating the norms of the family. And if the norm is always defer to dad, okay, I feel guilty when I don't, or always defer to mom, feel guilty when I don't. Or the norm is don't think about myself first, think about somebody else first. If you observe yourself violating that norm, you feel ashamed. And then now we get this interior force that talk to it. It's a critic. The big mistake that a lot of people made in the 20th century is we gotta get rid of those critics. No, that's not how nervous systems work. Nervous systems don't get rid of anything that's associated with survival. We need to teach those critics how to be more effective and kind critics. We need to teach them how to be coaches. And so a lot of what we do in psychotherapy is we identify the critic and turn it into a coach, helping the person be better, because that was the original purpose, that interior force. In my book, Waking Up, one of the first books on integrally informed psychotherapy, I said there's 3 things that therapists do. They remediate symptoms, enhance health, and support development. And the way they do that is they relate, they teach, they inspire people with visions of themselves being better. They confront unhealthy stuff. They interpret patterns that people have, and they direct. They say, I think this is healthier and this is less healthy. And if you take all the stuff that therapists do, basically it's those things. And the more you practice psychotherapy, the better you get at doing that with different types of people who are in different states of consciousness and in different developmental levels. And the more you learn how to do it through all 8 zones and all 4 quadrants. And that's integrally informed psychotherapy.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess one question is in Bowen, right? He has a concept of the projection identification process. Every family has a shadow or the unknown parts. There's notion of like these roles that get assigned to kids, right? That there's the golden child or the scapegoat. They project that onto the child. I'm sure you've seen this where they bring their child and say, fix my child. And
Oh, yeah.
I've come to learn that it's usually more to do with the system. Obviously, there are kids that have dispositions that perhaps do have issues, behavior issues. But so I'm just curious what you think about that in terms of them projecting onto the child and then growing up with that later in life. How do you heal from that? And you mentioned obviously grief, that's part of it. They're thinking more of the system anxiety versus coming from yourself or your differentiation.
One thing that Bowen didn't know, and a lot of people didn't know, is how heavily heritable personality is. 70 to 80% heritable. So it's not just kids are assigned a role as savior or identified patient. They co-create it with their parents. Projection happens all the time. We're constantly projecting, and not just on people. We're projecting on communities, we're projecting on nature. It's always back and forth. If you do spiritual practice, after a certain number of years, what you're seeing around you is yourself, because I'm everything. And part of this is particularly my incarnation. Going back to the Bowen system, Bowen recognized not just in the nuclear family, but intergenerational. You talked about constellations. I like Hellinger's conceptualizations about it, and I use some of his stuff in my work. Bowen saw that the connections between people had their own quality, and that if it was a certain kind of distress, there were certain predictable things that would happen. If there was a difficulty connecting, if there was an over-connection, if there was an over-identification. Now, projective identification is a particular defense. Everybody uses it, but it's used on steroids by borderline personality disorder. In projective identification, you take whatever is bad about you, negative, destructive, and you project it on somebody else and you attack them. And as long as you're attacking them for that, you're protecting the emptiness inside you. If I was grandiose, I go, oh, Blake, you're being grandiose. You're being grandiose this way and this way. So it's projective identification. Now, that's one of many defenses. The useful thing with Bowen is that we do absorb people around us. Also, we absorb culture. When it comes to personality, interestingly, they have not been able to, so 75, say 70 to 85% personality is heritable. The research hasn't reliably been able to say where the rest comes from. You think it'd be family of origin. Doesn't come out in the research. So it's some alchemy of culture, the time that people are raised, the experiences they had. The family of origin matters. A couple of parents trying to make a growth hierarchy and continuing to work at that makes a difference. Treating their kids in the way that I mentioned earlier, treat them like regular people and teaching them empathy and problem solving. Okay, those kids do better. Family is risk factor for a lot of problems. Even if it doesn't cause it, it can make things a lot better. And healthy families are difficult in today's age because the pair bond has changed. This is the first time in history we have millions of couples with equal power. How do you arrange a family under those circumstances? At least during the patriarchy, the structure was in place, not anymore. Now, I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I like the current arrangement, but it really requires mothers and fathers, couples, to be more mature, to be more self-aware, to make an effort to take care of their friendship, their love affair, and their ability to solve problems, as well as to share the responsibilities of creating growth hierarchies in their systems. That's very challenging. And so that's one of the reasons that half of marriages end in divorce and why neurosis is a growth industry.
No, I see. You mentioned family constellations, and one part he talks about the hierarchy of love. There's a notion that there's a hierarchy, like you mentioned, in a family. But sometimes these parents will parentify their child or make them like a therapist. One thing I like about that approach is he talks about healing statements. You might have the parent sitting in the chair or pretend that the parent is in the chair, and you say these statements, honoring them as your mother or your father, but then also not burdening yourself anymore with what that kind of projection or neurosis they had. He also talks about hidden loyalties, and maybe the one question is you may be a product of this kind of family of origin, and I guess you don't want to, like, people go down these rabbit holes, right? And they read a lot about narcissism, or it's one of those things like you don't want to be a victim necessarily of it, because I'm sure from like a spiritual perspective, perhaps you chose this family in some sense, or for whatever reason you came on this planet with this family. Not to say that you're responsible necessarily the way a parent has mistreated you, but at the same time, all you can do is really take responsibility. You don't want to make a identity out of it, because I know some people out there, they feel like a victim of the narcissist or the personality disorder. And does that make sense? Like, how do you?
Makes great
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Mark Wallen's book, Didn't Start With You, one of the more recent books on Hellinger
yeah,
work, he's big with that. He's big with finding the statement that liberates you from the role that you were assigned or that you co-created with your parents. And yeah, parents parentify children all the time, and it feels horrible when it happens. And then they go, what's wrong with me because I feel horrible? So understanding that is there's steps that you go. One is understanding, why do I feel horrible? I feel horrible because I was parentified, and I feel responsible for my parent like I would, like if they were a kid. I don't want to do that. So you begin to feel those impulses to do that and begin to have choices about to do them or not. You begin to have statements you can make to a parent in an empty chair or a real parent that liberate you from the pathological aspects of the system. The challenge is I want to be a healthy member of whatever system I'm in. And if it's my family of origin or my marriage or with my daughter or my mother or my sister or my brother, I need to discover my impulses to be less healthy and develop a capacity to be more healthy. And that's more heartfelt, more in integrity, more authentic, better boundaries, more assertive. Then it depends on the nature of what's possible in a relationship, how much intimacy you can create. One of the things you grieve is that ideal parent had a level of intimacy that, at least idealized, that you want with them, that they know you in a way that you really wanted to be known by them. And so sometimes that's possible and sometimes it's not. And if it's not, then we grieve that and recognize that's clean grief. That's fine. Is it complicated and complex? Yes, it is. Is it worthwhile? Yes. It's helpful for us to feel ourselves as part of multi-generational systems. It's helpful for us to have a sense of whether we're navigating in a more healthy or less healthy way, and to have a principle of navigating in a more healthy way. It leads to better relationships, more physical health, more joy in life, all the kinds of things that we want.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. I follow this guy, Jerry Wise, and he talks about staying calm as much as possible. It's not always easy, right? When you're around family of origin, they know how to get at you, and you find yourself reverting back to this child self, and you, like you said earlier, it's like an archaic programming that comes up. I think you mentioned you set boundaries, and if they don't respect it, you move away or you communicate. It's difficult because usually they're not going to be accountable. Yeah.
If I'm staying calm, there is a wise self that I'm staying anchored in that's observing me and the people and making decisions. That compassionate self-observer, that's central to all change work. If you're there, you can observe what's going on and make a decision that serves the highest good. And you'll feel yourself having impulses to fall into the old patterns. And you don't have to say yes to those impulses. You can instead do a new behavior or a new response that is healthier and more mature, more caring, more assertive and kind. When we make those choices, we feel better. We feel good about ourselves. And also, the systems themselves get healthier. Somebody in a system not participating in the pathology makes it a healthier system. Sometimes it disrupts it. Strategic family therapy, Jay Haley, Joe Bonnet, Chloe Madonna, would give these weird assignments to families. And the reason they did it is they wanted to disrupt the institution, the system. They'd tell the couple, look, you got to have a fight every evening at 7:00. By doing that, they disrupted the pattern that couple had about having a fight every evening. Once it's disrupted, the assumption, which happens sometimes and not other times, is that our more caring impulses and our impulses to be intimate and more mature have more room to come out. And that's true for all the different brief family therapy, extended family systems, personality work, depth psychology. All of them basically are, in certain circumstances, the input that helps somebody grow. And in some other circumstances, not so much. Carl Jung said that I develop a new psychology with every single one of my patients. And I think to a certain extent that's true. The person comes before the system and understanding. The territory comes before the map.
No, I see. I guess just with Carl Jung, right, as the notion of the archetypes, I haven't delved too much into it, but you could see that you have a father, like an inner father, an inner mother, and there's a unhealthy version and there's a healthy version. Do you like then there's this notion of inner bonding therapy or reparenting yourself? Do you think that's because you grow up with parents that weren't good enough parent in some sense, maybe emotionally just not there, or a certain amount of neglect? Because I think that, yeah, a lot of my clients, they find themselves in a family and they didn't really have those parents. And then they might be parents themselves and then they don't want to pass it on to their kids. And yeah, I'm just curious about that. Do you think that because you could think about role models like healthy men maybe, or healthy women, or the feminine?
My orientation towards masculine and feminine is heavily influenced by David Data, who has the best teaching in this. And we never lose any of the people that we were. In our right hemispheres are our autobiographical narratives of our lives. Me as child, me as infant, me as teenager, me as athlete, me as therapist, me as husband, me as lover, all those things. All those autobiographical narratives are alive. This is what narrative therapy is based on. Since we're humans, there are certain forms that resonate with us. For instance, we're all born with 6 moral foundations. Culture teaches us what they're going to be. Integrity, loyalty, sanctity are 2 of them. And fairness and caring are 2 of them. Out of this comes, I was treated unfairly, or that kid, that part of me, I have difficulty, I don't like this part of me, that kind of stuff. As you cultivate the compassionate witness, everybody has this, okay? Richard Schwartz's internal family system called it the self. Carl Jung called it individuation. Murray Bowen called it differentiation. Freud said the ability to love and work. Well, who's loving and working, Freud? There's a mature ego. In current integral studies, we're talking about ego development. Though you can, because of the nice thing about an integral psychograph is we can see how somebody can be high on one line, say the self line, but maybe lower on the integration of defenses line, something like that. So ultimately, it's our responsibility to organize all that stuff. I have a thing on my website. For a while, I did these joke videos called Therapists in the Wild. And one of them was, who's driving your bus? Because the thing is, okay, you got a bus with everybody that you've ever been on it. And the question is, who's driving? If it's my macho, screw everybody, or if it's my, oh no, I'm really scared part, or it's my infant, I can't do anything, or it's I can't be wrong, or if it's my wise self, we want that compassionate witness to be driving the bus. And so if that happens, everybody behind is a cacophony. You're also a choral director, trying to get everybody to sing together in tune. It's our job to do that. If there's some part of us that just chronically sings out of tune because it just always feels angry or unhappy or sad or anxious, our job is to go get connected with that and help that part feel secure and loved and find their spot and support them in their spot. Now that's inner parts work, and everybody does it. Psychosynthesis people call it subpersonalities, and the Gestalt people did it out of dreams, and Richard Schwartz does it out of firefighters and exiles. All those systems are great. I'm just interested in what system appeals to my client. They are a Jung's system. He brought the spirit and sanctity into the psychotherapy. We do have forces in us. Say men hunger to be acolyte, warrior, man of wisdom. Guys that don't feel themselves making that progression suffer. Women to experience themselves as an open channel of emotion and a radiator of light and love. They hunger for that. Okay? These come from the drives. And so learning how to do that in a way that works for you is really important. And also shadow. Though Jung saw shadow mostly as negative, as did a lot of other people. In my book, Shadow Light, I say, wait a minute. If you look at shadow as the entire adaptive unconscious, we have healthy and unhealthy impulses coming up from there all the time. As we develop the compassionate witness, we can notice the healthy stuff and say yes, notice the unhealthy stuff and go, wait a minute, let's do something better. And that relationship with shadow, with self and shadow, determines how we integrate. And to me, that fits with the neurobiology of cognition and development better than any other formulations of shadow. And that's what Shadow Light and the Shadow Light workbook are all about. By the way, all my stuff is available for free on my website, drkeithwitt.com. If you want to know about any of this stuff, go to my website. There's thousands of pages and 10 books and hundreds of videos and blogs.
Yeah. I'll have to check that book out. I know that Ken Wilber says about the golden shadow. So I imagine you talk about that, do you? Or is that what you mean?
Exactly. Ken and I had an argument about this. He didn't like me redefining shadow according to modern neurobiological research. So he and I went back and forth about it. One of my favorite arguments of all time. Eventually came to the same conclusion. Ken draws from the 20th century understanding of destructive shadow and golden shadow being good stuff. My understanding of the way the human nervous systems work is different. We take in millions of inputs. Our adaptive unconscious decides on plus or minus 3 to focus on and gives us a story and an impulse and emotion to motivate us to move forward. It's happening with you and me right now. Our conscious awareness is anywhere from 1/10 of a second to a second behind what our unconscious is giving us. If we're feeling secure and socially engaged, generally those are positive impulses and positive stories. We're feeling threatened, they're generally defensive, and we get distorted. Part of development is being aware of that and making decisions about it. And if you're aware of the constructive and destructive material, you can lean towards the constructive and catch the destructive and do something different. That pause before action is called response flexibility. It's one of the hallmarks of development. In interpersonal neurobiology, that's basically one of the hallmarks of a healthy person.
No, I think of IFS, right? The way they frame it is like you merge, or what do they call it? These parts are blended. And I found with some of my clients, they really have a lot of complex trauma. There's all these different parts, and there's not necessarily a strong sense of self. And I'm sure you know with In Over Her Head by Robert Keegan, like he talks about making subject object. And I think that's relatable to this concept too, would you say?
Exactly. And there's a book on my website, Trauma into Transcendence, where I talk about the 4 stages of trauma work. It progresses through stages. The beauty of the IFS system is that he looks, if you're working with Schwartz, who's a great therapist, great guy, he sees the self, because you can always feel it. And he's coming from that place, the wise self, which through mirror neurons activates it in other people. Like you and I right now are, through various resonance circuits, recapitulating each other's states of consciousness, including our intentionality. As I talk, some part of you is sub-vocalizing what I'm saying, and I do the same thing when you're talking. The level of resonance is amazing. And so Richard Schwartz will be coming from that place with someone, and then he'll say you have exiles that you want to get rid of, and you have managers that are trying to control the distress, and you have firefighters that want to redirect you when you're feeling a dangerous surge of emotion, and let's work with them. And so he does essentially family therapy with them, and it's quite effective. Some people respond well to that, some people don't. Some people respond more to an archetypal sense. Some people respond more to the whole concept of the hero's journey, of being called, and there's a threshold guardian, and you have to go on the road of adventures and reconcile with the father and the mother and the darkness in the belly of the whale. That really hits it for some people, and it's okay, that's where we go. Where are you on your hero's journey, and how can I help? Because on the hero's journey, you always get magical aid. And if you're a therapist, that's you. You're one of the sources of magical aid on your client's hero's journey, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. I think it sounds like you're obviously very client focused, like you're saying with Young, like what to say, a new psychology with each client. I'm curious when you meet someone new, like with a consult, usually I think what they want to know is just, can this person help me? Or, but sometimes I find it a bit tricky sometimes to answer, like, because obviously you can't explain like integral theory to them and all this detail, but sometimes I'm just really listening. I think the relationship is really like what 60-70% they say of the benefits of therapy.
In one study, the relationship was 30% of the variance of positive change. Client variables, what they're bringing for the table, was 40%. Placebo is 15%. Come to see me and give me a lot of money, you expect to get better. And 15% with method of treatment. And in general, method of treatment matters, but not as much as the relationship client variables.
Yeah, I think some therapists, you know what to say, it's because of my own experience in my past and also just my own reading. I think I understand with integral theory, using these different lenses and approaches. But I think for a lot of therapists, they don't necessarily have the insights in terms of the family and personalities and how that can impact. I think in our society, it's very much like value family, communicate with your family. It's the only family you got thing. And they might treat the anxiety or the depression, but perhaps not see an insight into what's really the parent maybe having this influence. And anyway, I don't know what my question was. It's just, I think some therapists don't necessarily have that awareness of this kind of the influence that a personality or being on the receiving end of that can be. Yeah.
I think every year that goes by, I learn new things about people that I didn't know before. And I've been doing this 50 years. And I've written 10 books. Actually written more than that, but I have 10 published on my website. I'm sure there's stuff, particularly neurobiological stuff. I was blown away when I found out the genetic research on personality disorders. I just didn't know that until the last few years. And if I would have known it 20 or 30 years ago, it would have changed how I did certain things. So all you do is the best that you can under the circumstances. And as a therapist, you want to find your own natural healing style. Like when I teach people, I don't want to teach people how to be a key therapist. I want them to find out what feels most magic to them in terms of how they encounter and help. And let's enhance that. You can use stuff that I know and that I teach to help you be more your natural healing style. Because ultimately, our instrument is ourselves, our psychology.
Yeah.
And we want to be authentic. And our natural healing style is our most authentic form of helping.
And maybe just one last thing in terms of somatic practice, I think you can go to talk therapy and it's good to analyze and to intellectually understand things. But I think the body keeps the score and trauma can get embedded in different parts of the body, get localized. Do you encourage with your patients or clients somatic practices? And I guess what do you think about that in terms of, because I don't tend to recommend that, but I don't necessarily specialize myself in that. There's EMDR, there's these, I think, I don't know if you heard primal trust is another one I've heard about. And anyway, I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
I've studied a bunch of them in practice. I studied Taoist healing, which is an intense body work, when I was 30, which is 45 years ago, which blows my mind. Anyway, I'll teach people how to stand, how to breathe. I give people meditations to practice. Everything is connected. I encourage people to find body workers that they like, practices that they like. I'm a martial artist. Practicing martial arts benefited me enormously in my development and still does. I also was a dancer. Dance benefited me when I studied dance and other activities. I was a surfer, I was a tennis player. I've done a lot of things. And my clients have things that they do, something that keeps them embodied, something that gives them a sense of power in their body, a sense of agency in their body. And that's really important. And so that's always a subtext of the work. My clients tease me. I'll go, how do you feel in your body when I say that? And after, I don't know, 20 sessions, 50 sessions, so they'll look at me and go, you're going to want to know how I feel in my body as I say that. I go, yeah, that's exactly right. I want to know how you're feeling in your body. That connection, that awareness turned into action, turned into posture, turned into how you navigate in the world, turned into what you eat, turned into the substances that you use. All that stuff is the somatic stuff. To me, the term somatic psychotherapy is a redundancy. All psychotherapy is somatic. How could it not be? It's just a matter of
Yeah.
how much you emphasize it and how you emphasize it. I teach Hachi Dan King or sometimes a Qigong exercise, sometimes. It just depends.
Yeah, and I'm sure with your clients too, right? You notice the body language. You're dealing with a couple. You see the wife or the husband turning away to touch their throat, or they
Oh,
cover their
yeah.
stomach, and so you pick up on those things, right? And you point those out.
Point out the obvious, make the implicit explicit, point out the obvious. With couples, a cool technique with couples always, if there's tension, say, hey, look in each other's eyes. It's much, much harder for them to enact negative patterns with eye contact because look what's happening with eye contact. In this immediacy, it's hard for me to be a dick, if you get my point. And so they'll always avoid eye contact when they start enacting the relational defensive patterns. And so one great way of interrupting this is have them look in each other's eyes and they'll resist it. And you go, no, look, now how does
Mm.
that feel? And now we're getting them engaged with each other. And now both of their bodies are involved. And there's an empathic circuit going on and there's self-awareness. That's a good one. I use that quite frequently with couples.
Do you like Gottman? Do you ever use Gottman's? That's usually the framework I use with couples.
I
But
love him. I did a
mm,
workshop with him once, told him at the end, I said, I studied a lot of systems, John. Yours has the most good stuff and the least bullshit of all the
mm,
systems. He smiled because he knew he was right. He's done the research. He had the rare gift of not having a horrible intuition when it came to couples. His hypotheses never worked out, but so he would go test them and then he would find out what really worked. When I'm quoting couples research, probably half of it is coming out of his lab. Now, the other half is coming from all the other social research that we see. It's very practical, and I love him a lot. And he's less ideological. Susan Johnson,
yeah.
you can tear my voice. Like her thing, emotionally focused therapy is a good way of working with couples, particularly if one's been traumatized. But it's rigid. She says, you got to do it this way. You got to do it this way. For instance, you got to be slow and soft. Sorry, Susan Johnson, I am never going to be slow and soft, consistent.
Mhm.
She's caught up in her own thing. John Gottman is more open to, all right, so what helps people change? He said once in a lecture that made me love him, he said, I think a lot about my failures, my clinical failures. I think a lot about them. And I want to find out more. I want to get better in those areas. I thought, God, John, you're my kind of guy.
No, I appreciate your time. I'm not
You're
sure if there's any other
welcome.
questions, but I don't know if there's anything to wrap up. But yeah, I think, yeah, just this course I'm doing is just walking through the different quadrants and focusing on emotional maturity and narcissism. Do you see those as distinct or the same? Or I guess because it seems like it's because from an emotional lens, right, you could see as a developmental, okay, my mom's just emotionally mature. I can maybe only get certain things across. But with perhaps a narcissistic person, they're probably going to have these defense mechanisms. It seems more dire, right? I guess if it's anyway.
Yeah, they're distinct. You are emotionally mature if you're a narcissist, but that doesn't, emotionally immaturity doesn't necessarily mean that you're a narcissist. And people probably get as much trouble from the other personality disorders, borderline especially, but also histrionic. It's nice to know that there's other people that have had to go through what you go through. Okay? It's nice to know there's other people that had borderline mothers that had to struggle with self-identity and weird psychosexual intricate messages. It's nice to know that as a human, I'm going to continue to discover parts of myself, blind spots that are opportunities to grow, and that will never stop. It's a beautiful thing to be non-pejorative about our strengths and weaknesses, to see it all as a developmental challenge that we either take or we don't take. Taking it is a good thing. It's virtuous. It makes us stronger and wiser. Trauma into transcendence, a point that I'm fond of making, and I make many times, is the way to get through trauma is to feel stronger and wiser on the other side. Now, we don't want to I never choose trauma to get stronger and wiser, but to get stronger and wiser on the other side of trauma is what makes it acceptable. Ultimately, we want radical acceptance. Compassionate witness radically accepts everything as it is, which, by the way, is one of the old folk recipes for happiness. You want to be happy? Expect everything to be exactly as it is right now.
If you're resisting something, there's a level of suffering. I've had some clients have some pain where they've been through a motor vehicle accident, and there is that pain, but then there's also the resistance to that pain. It's hard, right? We make things worse the way we're resisting it.
It's what the Dalai Lama called it the suffering of suffering. He said there's the suffering of change, and we can't do anything about that. There's the suffering of being awake in a world where we're the only ones awake. Can't get around that. There's a suffering of suffering. That's unnecessary. Okay? We don't have to have that. And so we can choose to have less of that.
I appreciate your time. If there's anything else, I'll have to check out your books and look more into it.
That would be great. If there's anything interesting in it, let me know. It's great that you're doing this class, this teaching. And I encourage you to continue.
Yeah, thank you. You have those clients, you do it for 5 years, and you can find yourself kind of repeating certain strategies or tools. And why not put this in a course, right?
Teach it.
Yeah. And then when you teach it, I've learned a lot just in the fact of teaching it.
That's one of the reasons I do these things. I always learn a lot when I have conversations like this. But this is the one institution. I have no faith in institutions. They all become corrupt. But I have faith in this institution, the institution of the dialectic, to inform people engaged in the dialectic with the goal of enhancing or understanding the human experience. That's a metapsychology. That's what we've been doing. And I think that is the metapsychology that organizes other psychologies. I think it's a turquoise psychology from an integral standpoint. And I believe that's an institution I have 100% belief in. I believe in the dialectic in the second tier.
That makes sense. All right. Well, thank you. And yeah, have a good day. And
you too.
Yeah. All right.
Great seeing you, Blake.